morning, everyone, and welcome to episode 81 of the Retrospectives podcast, GoldenEye 007. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Turlings. James, are you a Bond fan? Have you seen many of the films? Is it your cup of tea, or not really your thing?
I actually did when I saw them when I was younger. I really like the Pierce Brosnan films. I don't think GoldenEye was my favorite of them. I think it was the final of the 3 or 4 movies he did that I liked the most because it was the cheesiest, and I like it when they're like less serious. I found the more recent ones to be too straight. It wasn't as fun and stupid as the old ones were. So I was kind of hoping that they managed to capture that magic with this game when we jump back in for it.
Yeah, see, I'm the opposite. I liked it when the Bond films played it a bit straighter, like they do in GoldenEye. And when it gets really campy and ridiculous, I'm just like, I see where Austin Powers got that material.
Yeah, that's
like
the
Austin,
best.
Austin Powers is barely a satire at some point.
That's why No One Lives Forever was great, because it was like leaning into that ridiculousness that I liked.
Is that the North Korean one?
Yeah, I think so. The guy with like the diamonds in his face. Oh, it's so good. And he's got the car on the ice inside the observatory or whatever it was.
And then there's the invisible car. I think I'm thinking of a different one to you. But I've always preferred when they've played it straighter. And that's one of the reasons why I've always liked GoldenEye a bit more, because it's a more serious take on Bond films, and I like the modern Bond films the best, like the Daniel Craig era.
Yeah, I saw Quantum of Solace, thought it was Garbo, and then never watched the rest, to be honest.
That is an accurate assessment. Quantum of Solace is pretty mediocre.
Casino Royale was good, though. I thought that was a good movie.
Even the one... even Skyfall, I think, like from a plot perspective, isn't very good, but there are some fantastic moments in Skyfall which I think are amongst the best in any Bond film ever. So I like the more serious Bonds. So GoldenEye was always one of my favorites.
Well, I guess the real question is how well does this game translate film to video game? This is the first tie-in we've done?
No, we did the Lord of the Rings one, and I'm sure we've done one or others. Yeah, so that'll be an interesting comparison point, because video game version of movies and movie versions of video games rarely go well. Very rarely. Yeah. So for those who haven't listened to us before, James and I make up the Retrospectives podcast. Each and every fortnight, we play classic games of the past with the intention of reviewing and discussing them from a modern perspective. Critically, this is not a nostalgia podcast. We're not here to idolize this game of the past, to reminisce on our childhood memories. We played this game through today as adults, and we want to talk about the experience of playing it today. So it's a very much a nostalgia-free, non-contextual review, and we're going to give it to you straight whether GoldenEye has truly stood the test of time or not. So for those who have no idea what GoldenEye is or what we're talking about, GoldenEye 007 is a first-person shooter developed by Rare and was first released for Nintendo 64 in 1997. As we were talking about, it is loosely based on the James Bond film GoldenEye, with many of the missions roughly corresponding to events in the film. It's not a one-for-one exchange, but a lot of it is pretty close to the mark. So you play as James Bond as you travel across the globe to stop the GoldenEye, which is a satellite capable of launching a devastatingly powerful EMP charge anywhere on the globe. So for today, and for over the past couple of weeks, we played on an emulator that was specially tailored for this game and Perfect Dark, which is called 1964. So it's a custom-built emulator, Nintendo 64 emulator, for exactly those two games. So what do you get out of it? Well, the biggest one is that there's a plugin that supports mouse and keyboard controls, which for me is a lifesaver, because as is well documented, I really don't like playing FPS games on controllers. But it's much more than that. It's got options to increase field of view to something reasonable, and even lets you pump the frame rate to a smooth 60 FPS. For me, it worked fantastically after I did a bit of tweaking to get it looking how I wanted it to, and I think it goes a long way to fix a lot of issues that I would consider deal breakers. The surprising thing is, in terms of video options, this emulator of a 1997 title actually has more video options than, you know, games from the early 2000s. So I really enjoyed being able to tailor it to what I wanted to get the look I wanted. Did it work well for you, James, or did you have any issues?
Yeah, it did. Like, as a note, I really am a lot less picky than you are when it comes to things like this. Like field of view, I don't even notice if somebody doesn't point it out to me. I could have it, you know, at that default low setting. It wouldn't bother me at all. But you know, 60 FPS out of the box, full screen mouse control without having to configure anything. Yeah, it just plugged and played for me for the most part. Like, it just started the game, pressed the 4 key on my keyboard to enable mouse, and it just worked. I will say it did not like alt-tabbing very much. It also, I noticed that it liked to exit full screen mode whenever I pressed something and then undo the mouse control. So there was a bit of fiddling I had to do every time I played, but, you know, it was a lot more... It was a lot smoother and nicer looking than it would have been if we'd played it on a different emulator, for sure.
It's weird for you to say that you don't notice field of view, because I always notice when field of view is off. I still remember when we booted up Vampire the Masquerade and the default field of view was 58. I was going to vomit. But luckily, it's a source-based game, so I was able to fix it.
You just turn the mouse faster, easy.
Yeah, it makes me sick. It's so bad, and
it's really bad for you because I know you play with a really low mouse sensitivity. Where mine's like I move it a centimeter and I do a 180 basically. So I guess maybe that's why it doesn't bother me as much.
I think it might just be that I've always played on PC, whereas console games are designed for you to be, you know, sitting on a couch 3 meters away from the TV. But either way, GoldenEye supports however you want to play it, good field of view or not. So the structure of the game is pretty simple. You select a mission, you select a difficulty for that mission, and when you finish that one, the next one unlocks. Each mission is usually part of a greater whole. So, for example, missions 1 through 3, Dam, Facility, and Runway, they take place chronologically immediately after the other. You start by infiltrating, then you blow some shit up, then you make your getaway. And most missions in the game are in a cluster of somewhere between 2 to 5 of these individual levels. You can imagine that because of the Nintendo 64 hardware, they had to split up a level into a bunch of different segments. It doesn't really affect much. It just means that you kind of have these narrative clusters of missions. Total of 20 missions, so, you know, each one's about, 2 to 4. I think where we'll start our discussion, James, is probably with the story, and then we'll start moving into gameplay ideas afterwards.
Okay.
I think that the first thing I want to talk about, this is a movie tie-in game. So I want to talk a little bit about the movie, just very briefly, to explain what I think this game does well and what it doesn't do so well story-wise. So, like I said, I enjoy GoldenEye. I think it's a good action thriller. I think there are a lot of excellent slow scenes scattered in between the actiony ones. And for me, I've always liked the slower and quieter character building moments in Bond. Like when Bond is wearing his suit and he's in a casino. When he's having that meeting with his nemesis and they're having a long, sinister conversation. Those are always my favorite moments. And then when it kind of breaks down into an action scene with Bond killing 3,000 people as he escapes, my eyes tend to glaze over. I find those less interesting. I think the problem with GoldenEye 007 as a video game is that the game is absolutely terrible at showcasing those slower moments, those more emotional moments, because of the time in which it was released.
I'd go a step further and say not only it's not bad at doing them, it just doesn't do them, right? Like, at all.
Well, it tries, right? But what we get is we get a bit of static text on the screen with no voice acting, and the character models are ludicrously bad, so we get nothing resembling acting.
I'd say it's the loosest definition of the word tries possible. Like, it's like the most token gesture for all of these moments to put them into the game. Like, I think this game's presentation and the way it presents dialogue in particular is actually the worst I've seen in a video game. Like, you'll be in a mission and you'll have to talk to an NPC. And maybe in a modern game, this game didn't have voice acting, number one. You'll walk up to the character and the text kind of appears above their head, and you can't really, you can't press buttons to make it go by faster. So you just have to sit there until they finish talking and objective complete appears on the bottom of your screen. It's so bad. It's unforgivably bad, in my opinion.
Yeah, what it's doing is it's replicating the thing, because a lot of the moments, those interactions are kind of replications or at least references to things that happen in the film, but it does it with zero emotional hook or investment whatsoever. It says, hey, we're doing the thing that was in the movie, but it gives you no reason to actually be invested or interested in any of these exchanges outside of the fact that it's a replication of something that happened in the movie. And I think that for me, because everything I like about Bond is the slower character moments, those are my favorite bits, GoldenEye completely fails for me story-wise, because the actiony stuff, which it does have good replications, when you play this game, you murder hundreds of people in your quest around, which is pretty accurate to the films. But in terms of the things I like out of Bond films, it doesn't do anything for me. It's just a bunch of go here, murder these people, go here, destroy this, go here, do this. And there's no emotional investment for me whatsoever.
Yeah, and I'd take it a step further and say that what story they tried to include actively detracts from this as a video game. Because you'd be moving through these levels, doing your little firefights and actiony skirmishes, and then you're forced to walk up to this NPC and just stop and stand still for 40 seconds with no way to skip through it. It just completely kills any of the tension. And as we'll probably go into this a bit later, when you play this game on the higher difficulties, you often probably need to play a level more than once because, they have objectives that are relatively easy to fail sometimes. And if you're forced to sit through that conversation, 2 or 3 times, it really, really hurts the experience, in my opinion. And I also want to say, I think that movie tie-ins are hurt more than other genres by hardware limitations, right? This is a movie game with no voice acting whatsoever, which I think kills a lot of the characterization entirely for me. Even the mission notes at the start of the missions, no voice acting. Even if they wanted to do, on newer hardware, the barest minimum, they could just take recordings from the movie and chuck it in, and that'd make it feel more like the movie, I guess. None of that's here. I think Max Payne has better character models than this game, and that game's character models were so bad they were funny and I liked them.
I was going to bring up Max Payne actually because it uses that same technology where it's just the face
it's
plastered
just the
on the model.
photo just plastered on the model. It looks so bad here, and there's no in Max Payne there was this degree of humor to it. I think it was almost self-aware at some points. Here it's
played straight.
Yeah, it's trying to play it straight, and it makes me laugh. It looks terrible.
So there was one bit of characterization I liked, at the beginning of every mission, you have a briefing and you have each person speak to you. So M speaks to you, then Q talks to you. And Moneypenny is always at the end there, and she's always desperately thirsty for Bond in every single one. So I thought that was funny, and I enjoyed seeing that message every time. But I agree with you, James. I think that in a way, I see what you're saying, that, a game like Quake or Doom, which has no interaction with any NPCs, which is just a level where you walk around shooting people, that's a purer, more action-pumping experience from start to finish instead of being awkwardly interrupted by dialogue that you couldn't care less about.
Yeah, I genuinely think if this game was Doom and had zero story and zero Bond theming over it, I would probably like it more, to be honest. So yeah, I think it's a huge miss. I like the movie a lot too, and I think this game for me just completely failed to, put anything that I like into the story. There's no nuance whatsoever to any interaction. It's just all action, and they took the worst parts, chucked it in the game, and it is what it is.
Yeah, I wouldn't go as far as you. I think that the story and objectives and things like that do functionally work at providing context for the murdering you're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that it works on a a mission to mission basis. It's like, here is your mission. You need to disrupt the satellite, interrupt the comms, destroy the cameras, go. And I think that it works on a story level like that, as opposed to Doom or Quake, which has reached the exit. It's just, in terms of my emotional investment in the story, it's actually none. I'm just trying to reach the end of the level and murder everyone, and it works only on that level.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, all right. So, not high on the story stuff so far. So, I do want to talk a bit about the gameplay. So, coming into this episode, we spoke about 2 weeks ago how, Patrick, you hate console shooters, and you picked this game specifically so that you could say that console shooters suck.
Hold up. I mean, a little bit. Guilty. I kind of wanted to take on console shooters, but yeah, I wanted to give them their best chance to impress me.
Okay, so how did this one stack up in terms of general gameplay mechanics?
Okay, so I think the place to start is the objective-based design of GoldenEye,
like the level structure.
Yeah. So what this game does, it does what Thief does actually with its difficulty settings. So the harder the difficulty you select, the more objectives that you need to complete in the course of a mission, which I think is a great way to do difficulty. I really, really like this. I played the whole game on the highest difficulty. I figured because I was using mouse and keyboard, doing anything else would be absurd. The level design is interesting in that it's not strictly linear. It's not Call of Duty, but I would say most of the levels in this game are broadly linear. You might have little loops in corridors you can do and move around, but the overall flow of most of the levels is linear-ish. Would you agree with that assessment, James?
Yeah, it's almost like there's a square on the map that says start and a square on the map that says end, and then there's a bunch of objectives scattered around the levels often. So you'll come in from the level from the same start point every time, and then, you could take a different path through the level to do the objectives in a few different orders, depending on the level. And then once you've done your objectives, you go stand on the finish line and the level ends, I guess is how I'd describe it. There are some levels which are super linear. There's the one to stop the rocket, I think, where it's just a bunch of linear pathways. And then there's stuff like an open snowfield, which you could really do in any order you want, and then go stand on that end spot to end the level. So, some of the levels are more open than others, but I wouldn't say, like you said, that this isn't a linear progression game like Call of Duty is, I guess.
Yeah, well, Call of Duty is very tight in its linearity. It's very much a straight path with no deviations whatsoever. I still think most of the levels here have a somewhat logical progression to them, but there are some that break the mold. Like, my favorite mission in the entire game is the frigate mission where you're on the ship, and I think that is an example of a truly non-linear mission, because you can do literally anything in any order before returning to your little escape craft. But I think that most missions have, like, it's kind of hard to describe, but It would require some weird pathing to do things out of order. It's not like Thief, where you've got this big mansion and you could truly do it in any order. You are kind of gently pushed along a rough direction in most submissions.
So as far as I can tell, each mission has a start and an end. It has a primary objective, which every difficulty has, and then each difficulty adds one objective for a total of 3 or 4. I think some have one more than others. I wasn't too sure. But generally, on the harder difficulty, which I also mostly played on, there will be a variety of things to do. And these things are usually themed, as spy things, like put a tracker on the helicopter, take out gun emplacements secretly, find the hidden data, hack the computer, that kind of thing. And many of them will involve you using spy gadgets in your inventory to complete them. So you mentioned it before. I kind of agree that this ties in well with the whole spy theme, and it is probably the one thing that I'll say the theming does okay. How I wanted to know how you felt about the different kinds of objectives in this game, because like you, I really like the structure of having difficulty be tied to the number of things you need to be completed rather than just throwing more enemies at you or throwing more HP on the enemies or something like that. So I guess a lot of whether the mission structure succeeds in my eyes comes down to just how fun these secondary objectives are to complete.
So, like you, I like the structure, but I found the actual design of a lot of these objectives to be vague and confusing. And I failed a lot of them from a lack of understanding what it was that I needed to do. I have some examples of that, James, if you'd like me to go. All right, so there's a level on a train. You get to the end of the train, and your teammate Natasha is hacking a computer. You cut a little thing out of the ground, and you can leave to end the mission. However, if you leave too early, the mission fails because you need to sit there in the train doing nothing for however long it takes her to not just hack through one level of firewalls, but two level of firewalls. So if she hacks through the first firewall and you leave, mission failed. You have to do the whole thing again. Another example is on the second time you go to the surface, you have to. The objective is break communications linked to bunker. But if you walk up to the terminal and press E on it to activate, mission failed. You should have destroyed it, you idiot, instead of trying to break it by interacting with it. Boom, mission is over. You have to restart. And I had things like this happen like at least in 50% of the missions where I misunderstood what it was the game wanted me to do, and I failed and I had to restart because of it. Did you have these issues, James, or am I just an idiot?
Yeah, I also failed a lot of them. I failed those two you mentioned. I also failed those first try. There was a bunch of others. The mission on the boat that you said you really liked, I actually was one of my least favorite because I kept failing it because I'd come into a room at an all because there's hostages on the boat, and you have to save the hostages. But if you come into through the wrong door, they'll shoot you sometimes through the hostage, and then they'll kill the hostage. That happened to me so many times.
Sorry, just on that point. That was one of the things I liked about the mission because I was having that same issue, and I was like, oh, I see what I'm doing. I need to approach this from a different angle. And so I found a different doorway to enter to get a better angle on the person who was holding the hostage. And I enjoyed that as a gameplay evolution, like a learning experience from the first time I did it.
Yeah, I just found it kind of tedious, to be honest.
Okay.
I didn't really enjoy it very much. But you mentioned replaying the levels. Something I want to note earlier, I probably should have mentioned it before, is the levels in this game, I'm not sure if it's due to hardware limitations or, maybe it is intentional design. The levels are very short.
Mm-hmm.
These are probably the shortest FPS levels in a game that I've played, maybe. They're tiny. And that means that even though, you'll fail these objectives a lot, it's not a huge deal. It doesn't set you back like 20 minutes of your life to replay these missions, maybe like 4 or 5 minutes. So, I didn't really find the process of failing and retrying to be that bad. After the first few missions, I started treating this more like a puzzle game almost, where my first playthrough of a level was to figure out what I needed to do. And then once I figured out what I needed to do, I would replay the level with that understanding and then get to the end. And that's this kind of structure I don't mind, actually. If the objectives are interesting to work out the solutions to, it almost reminds me of playing through Hitman levels, right? You need to work out where everything is around the level and then, execute your plan. I didn't find most of the objectives to be engaging enough to justify this kind of gameplay structure for the most part, because a lot of them are things like pick up a key and open a safe, kill this guy, talk to this guy. None of them really engaged me that much. Like, now that you mention it, that one on the boat was probably the most interesting from a gameplay point of view. It frustrated me because I was bad, I guess.
See, I don't like them because it's very trial and error based. It's like, go in, do this thing, and when it fails, now you know what to do. I do agree with your point that when you know what to do, it's fine. Like, the levels are completely fine. I just think the process of figuring it out, there's no checkpoint, so if you try...
It's so short, it doesn't even need a checkpoint.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that. I guess what I'm saying is the process of figuring out what to do in the level is not fun, and I think that that's the main distinction from a normal puzzle game. With puzzle games, the figuring out part is enjoyable. The figuring out part here is just, I hope this works. It's just trial and error.
Well, it's very binary, isn't it? Because, like, you fail and you're like, oh, because there's, like, two things you can do sometimes. Or, like, half the time it's just use the item on the thing, and then that's all you have to do, which is kind of a pain in the ass, to be honest, because this game's interface and, objective tracking is honestly quite bad, I think. Like, all of it is stored in your wristwatch, which is, the pause menu. And, from a story theming perspective, that's fine, but it really is kind of like a modern game would track your objectives like in a little list on the side of the screen. In this game, your objectives, you kind of read them when you're going through the mission objective at the start, and then obviously you fight 20 guys, and then you've forgotten what all of them are. So
I immediately forget. I just almost instantly forget what they are.
Yeah, and half the time the notes, like in the pause menu, aren't enough to tell you what to do. Which would be fine. It's just kind of like, it is a big game of trial and error, and it's not like interesting learning, like you're experimenting with different approaches to do things. It's just, oh, here, the objective's around here. Does this work? No. Okay, it's this other thing. That's it. I like the structure of this game. Like, I love the fact that the missions are tiny and that they are more like a puzzle game. It's just that the actual substance of the puzzles isn't very interesting. So it's kind of unfortunate. And like I said, the interface is terrible. So if you need to use an item to do an objective, you just need to pause the game, cycle over, click on it, come out of the menu, use the item. It's a bit clunky. There's no, nice little backpack wheel or something like that. Or even on a PC game, pressing the numbers for the items, it's just tedious.
The funniest instance of that is when you get inside the tank, you have to open up your inventory and go to tank bullet for it to actually work. Instead of just, shooting the tank, you need to select tank after jumping in the tank. And it's very awkward, but I agree. Very frustrating, very annoying. Once you know what to do, it's not really an issue because you can just speed through the level and complete your objectives, but it's not fun getting there. And I think that for a experience, if you're not playing this through endlessly as many people did as kids, if you want to play it through once for the experience, it's not a really fun one.
Yeah, so let's talk about the music for a second and have a quick music break.
But before we do, I just have one more kind of, I guess, broad level design point I wanted to bring up.
Yeah, sure.
So one thing that really pissed me off about this game are the levels that have infinitely respawning enemies. I don't know if this was something you noticed, James. So there are levels where enemies will literally endlessly respawn from little boxes all mission long. So you're trying to complete an objective. You're trying to find what the hell it is you're meant to do. There's one mission in particular, which is like a mission that's filled with warehouses. And inside two of these warehouses are objectives and the rest are empty. And enemies just constantly respawn. So you're just wandering around identical looking warehouses, opening warehouse after warehouse and getting shot in the back nonstop. Infinitely respawning enemies is bad design. It doesn't matter if it's... Do you like infinitely respawning enemies, James?
I was going to get into this with into the next gameplay discussion section, but basically, after I decided that the objectives in this game weren't very fun, I played, half the game on easy because we played with this mouse and keyboard. Like, actually killing enemies on the harder difficulty was trivially easy anyway. I just chose to skip half of the objectives. And that mission you're talking about is one of the ones that I played without doing the objectives, and it was a lot more enjoyable because of that. Because I just got to shoot dudes for quite a while running around looking for the exit. Rather than what it sounds like you went through, being frustrated while looking for the objectives.
Well, there's like 12 warehouses, right? And most of them are empty. So you open them up and then close it while you're getting... And if you miss one, you get to the end of the level and they're spawning on both sides of you. I always think having a discrete level of enemies is better than just having an infinite stream, because you never get to safety. You never clear out an area and be like, okay, I can turn my back to this area. It's just like, just get shot in the back and there's nothing you can do about it. So yeah, I just think that this design is always going to be worse than having, a preset number of enemies.
Yeah, I guess I kind of liked on that level there being always someone around the corner to shoot. It gave it it made me engaged with the level from start to finish. If I'd just cleared them out instantly, walked to the end, it would have been extra boring, I guess. Yeah, it didn't bother me as much as it did you. The only time it annoyed me was on the tank level. Because I tried to clear them out for so long until I realized what was going on. But that was on me. Next try I just boosted towards the objectives and ignored the dudes. It was a lot easier. So yeah, I don't care as much as you do about that. Music wise, so I was kind of impressed at how many different songs on this soundtrack were just a remix of the main theme. Like, I thought halfway through the game that, they must be about to start giving us original music, and no, every single theme from every single level, as far as I can tell, is just a remix of the main theme. And on one hand, this was kind of impressive, and on the other hand, it got old pretty fast, I found.
See, I loved the music in this game. I thought it was excellent. Yeah, I was really high on it. I think that they did a great job. Every single mission in this game has its own music. Some of it is suspenseful, some of it is more energetic. My favorite pieces were the more suspenseful ones, where you're kind of creeping around the base with your silencer and the music matches. But even the more intense ones I thought were very fitting and enjoyable. I enjoyed the soundtrack from start to finish. I don't think there is a single bad track on the soundtrack, except maybe the elevator music, but that's like a deliberate gag. It's meant to be bad. So yeah, I really enjoyed the music, James. I'm surprised you bounced off it.
I'm not saying I bounced off it. I'm saying, I guess, that like halfway through the game, I was starting to wish the variety, like I wasn't hearing the main theme over and over.
Yeah, that's weird, because the individual pieces of music are distinct from one another. Like I didn't find it repetitive. I found that there were a couple that resembled one another, but on the whole, the music does evolve throughout your playthrough.
Yeah, I guess I just heard the same little bits throughout the songs. It made it seem a bit samey. Like, I agree with you on the whole that the soundtrack is good, don't get me wrong. I just didn't love it, I guess. Like, there are, 3 to 4 tracks that I did quite enjoy, and then the rest of them I was like, in the middle about. I didn't hate any of the songs. So, it's decent, for sure. I just don't love it, I guess. So which song did you like the most, by the way?
So the one I liked was the Saverna one, the Return to Saverna. This is one of those suspenseful tracks I was talking about. Lots of use of xylophone, some horns in there, and very, very bassy drums. And I just think it's a fantastic piece of music. Like, I really enjoyed these slower ones where you're sneaking around with the silencer. So this is Savernia Bunker Complex.
That was Savernia Bunker Complex. It was, pretty alright. It's not my favourite track. We'll get to that one a bit later. But for now, we'll talk a bit about the moment-to-moment gameplay. Now, I was expecting to not enjoy this very much, and so far in the show I've been pretty negative. But actually, for me, this was the highlight of the game. I was not expecting it to feel good to play at all, basically, and I came into it and really enjoyed how this game feels to play at a base level, which kind of dragged the whole experience up quite a bit for me. So I'd say that the two things that contribute most to this for me are, number one, you move a lot faster than I was expecting to. I feel like the movement is comparable to something like Doom in speed. You can zoom around the maps super quickly, which I always think, in basically every game where you can move fast, it makes the game more enjoyable. And number two, I wasn't expecting this, but all the guns are projectile-based, as far as I can tell. And I much prefer projectile-based weapons than hit-scan weapons in my shooters, even with modern weapons like this game has. And in combination with that, when you're not, aiming down sights, there's no aiming reticule on the screen. And I found that gives me, in combination with the projectiles, means that you kind of have to, adjust a lot. You have to play around the visible projectiles on your screen to figure out where to aim. And so, when I wasn't getting frustrated with objectives, this game was doing like a Doom impression with headshots. Like, the most fun I had in this game was when I turned objectives off and just tried to do each level as fast as I could with the highest accuracy and headshot percentage, at the same time. And from then, it went from being this mediocre puzzle game to being something that was actually quite enjoyable for me, albeit, I couldn't play a lot of it in one go, because after maybe 2 levels, it's too easy. There's not enough challenge that the enemies provide you. There's barely any enemy variety, and we'll talk a bit about that. But just because the movement and the feel of shooting with mouse and keyboard in this game was really good for me, my average enjoyment in each level was a bit higher than I was expecting to, despite having a lot of problems with the story and the objective-based structure.
Yeah, I was going to say that running around quickly, hip firing at enemies without a crosshair, it makes my FPS monkey brain happy. Yeah. And I think this is maybe the difference between me and Lord of the Rings that we did, the other movie tie-in. There are people who say, yeah, playing that is like dumb fun, and I didn't really get that, because for me it wasn't dumb fun, but this I can get behind. Like, on a baseline level, running around quickly, hip firing headshots is fun. So a question I had for you, James, about the you said that the enemy fire is projectile based. I don't know if that's strictly true, but when I was posting about us playing this game on Twitter, one of our followers called Rosso Dude, he makes mods for games like System Shock 2 and other immersive sims, so I'm big into his stuff, obviously. He made a point on Twitter about the enemies, which is that they are hit scanners, but they fire in cones. Like, they're not just acquiring you and shooting at you. They find you and then shoot a projectile of bullets in like a fixed cone in front of them. So
I was referring to my projectiles, basically.
Oh, I think it's hit scan for your projectils as well.
Oh, is it? Like, you can see the visible tracer rounds as you shoot. Maybe it's a trick.
Yeah,
okay, sure.
It's a trick. But this is great, because I wanted to ask you about this, because I know that when we talked about Quake versus Call of Duty, one of the things you really liked about Quake instead of COD was the fact that you could dodge the projectiles of enemies. I think GoldenEye, as Rosso Dude says, presents a kind of unique model for hit scan shooters, because even though they are hit scanning, you can maneuver around these enemies to avoid getting hit a lot of the time, because when they fire, they keep firing in the same direction. Did you enjoy this model more than Call of Duty, or did you find that it ended up shaking up mostly the same?
Okay, I think the enemies in this game are stormtroopers. Like, they just shoot
Yep.
around you. Most of the time, I walk into a room and you can just stand still and slowly headshot everyone and you won't get hit. Was my experience with this game. So I don't think I ever actively tried to dodge the shot of an enemy, which was definitely to this game's detriment. I definitely never intentionally, I shot around from corners sometimes, but later on, once I realized going fast was the fun way to play the game, I didn't really need to go out of my way to dodge fire because they just missed me more often than not. Even on, when I was playing on the harder difficulty, it never really seemed a problem to me. So, yeah, I like the movement and the shooting on my end, I found to be really fun. And I was kind of disappointed that to me, like the enemies, I don't know, that like in one level there was some shotgun enemies, and in one level there was some dudes with rocket launchers, but there was like, it felt like those two and then some generic goons, and then some of them wore helmets. Compared to something like Doom, I didn't find the enemies to be fun to engage with, and they didn't present a unique combat puzzle in each different room like Doom would. So, I didn't really get anything from, this cone thing because I didn't notice it.
Yeah, well, if you're moving a lot, you're going to naturally dodge
Just
them,
not get
and I
hit.
think
Yeah.
that's the key thing, right? It's a way to encourage you to be strafing around them in circles, but that's
Yep.
naturally the play style you and I gravitate to anyway.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, James, were you playing on a lower difficulty for like the last set of missions, like from the jungle onwards?
Yeah, from about then, yeah.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I basically agree on you with the game being trivial up to about that point.
Okay.
And then it got pretty hard. Like I started struggling, I started dying multiple times, and I wonder if maybe the reduced damage you were taking on the lower difficulties the game finally reaches a reasonable difficulty level at those end parts.
Okay.
Like for example, how did you deal with the turrets? Because I was having serious problems with dying to turrets until I started getting strategic in dealing with them.
I approached them by using the trees as cover, basically, and then pop out from the tree, shoot it twice, go back into the tree, wait for it to stop shooting, do it again till I got them.
Yeah, so I ended up having to snipe them because the turrets on the higher difficulty level shred you, and when you get hit with a turret, or any gunfire, but with the turrets are way more accurate than the regular enemies. It interrupts you firing. Like every time you take damage, there's a brief moment where you can't fire back, so you can't just easily trade shots with them.
You might be able to lean. Did you? Because if you aimed it in
even when you lean,
okay.
they spot you and start shooting you. So you kind of have to get them right to the. You have to kind of cheese them a little bit by seeing the edge of them and shooting the edge of them if you want to guarantee not taking damage. The mission after the jungle one, when you go into the base and there's like 3 turrets that you need to shoot. The one where you're in the big satellite room and you need to defend Natalia as she decodes. Later on, you need to go into a room and destroy the mainframe. There's like a bunch of turrets defending it. Man, fucking died several times trying to do these missions. So I think that the difficulty is, as you said, mostly trivial, but I do think it steps up, and this combat challenge / puzzle that you're looking for comes into the fore in that last set of 6 or so missions.
Okay, I must have missed that playing on the easier difficulty, but I did. Like, even on that, I enjoyed the jungle mission because, approaching the things through the trees I found to be fun. I think the jungle, the snow missions, that warehouse mission you mentioned are probably the ones I ended up liking the most, just because they have more open level layouts rather than being these tight corridors. And I think that the quick movement really shines in the way when you have space to move around. When you're moving through corridors with crates filled in, it really, you don't get to take full advantage of that, and it's not as enjoyable for me. Whereas boosting around in circles, strafing around enemies, make monkey brain go happy, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I know that seems like a simple thing, but that is genuinely what it is. Like the most of the enjoyment I derived from GoldenEye was strafing around quickly, shooting people in the head, hip firing.
Yeah.
That the way the aiming works is kind of, I would say it's novel nowadays. Like at the time, I'm sure it was, revolutionary, but nowadays it's enjoyable for a different reason. So to aim, you have to be. It puts you to a standstill, and you kind of move the cursor around the screen to shoot where you need to shoot. Most of the time, you're not using this. You're using it maybe 10% of the time. But James, as you get into those later missions, it's not just the turrets. It's that enemies' acquisition rates on you are faster.
Yeah.
So particularly the first bonus mission, like enemies just spot you and start firing at you instantly. So you can just take a lot of damage if you're not careful. So you have to rely on it more. I had to rely on it more as I got to those later missions. Did you enjoy the aiming, or did you use it much at all?
I mostly liked going fast, so I did try to hit fire most of the time. But I did use the aiming. I liked that it made you stand still, actually, because it's kind of strategic in that way, because there's a clear downside to using it, that you're vulnerable. But it has a huge upside as a trade-off. So, like theoretically, I find that more interesting than just right-clicking to zoom in a bit while still moving around.
Mm-hmm.
So, in practice, I didn't have to use it that much near the end. Like, I used it a lot on the first level, actually, because there are these long tunnels. And you have
a sniper rifle.
Yeah, so you can kind of benefit from using it. So I used it most there, actually. And then I think maybe on the snow levels, I used it a bit. I probably I kind of want to give those later levels a go on the harder one, to give that a go, because it does seem fun.
That first level after jungle, where there's 3 turrets, you basically need to be crouched, corner strafing to take out these turrets with your pistol. Like it's genuinely difficult. And that the one when you get to the satellite room, that's the hardest, where you have to destroy the mainframe. It was not fun for me, but it was challenging in a way the game hadn't really been up to that point.
Another point I had is this game actually has, I don't know if you noticed it, but this game actually does have a kind of a stealth aspect to it, which was most
a little bit,
which was most noticeable when you get put in that prison cell and met Natalia for the first time. Did you find the throwing knives on that level right at the start?
No, I didn't. I just murdered everyone.
Yeah, like because you use this magnetic wristwatch thing to get the key off the wall, and then if you immediately out of the cell hang a right, there's like a hole, and if you use your wristwatch towards that hole, it puts these throwing knives in your inventory, which are silent ranged weapons, which, kill guards in 2 hits. So you can actually do most of that level without being seen, which I made a bit of a personal challenge for myself, and then gave up after like an hour of trying. But it was possible, and I kind of liked the inclusion. It did make, it gave me something to do and something to try, even though, I wasn't successful in the end. But, I kind of liked messing around with that. Yeah,
in some levels there are cameras, and if the camera spots you, it's infinitely spawning enemies times. And if it doesn't, then you might be safe from it.
Yeah.
So... the stealth is a very, very minor aspect of this game, and it's not really functional. It's there a little bit sometimes, but most of the time
I almost think because it's like it's almost an afterthought addition to the game. It's like I want to force myself to try and make it work. It's kind of like it's like janky fun, I guess I'd describe it.
Yeah, sure. I can see why that would be fun. I wanted to talk a little bit about the weapon selection in this game.
Go ahead.
Basically, this is a problem with the weapon selection, is that it mostly doesn't matter what weapon you have. Like, I think that there is a distinction between rifles being able to better snipe people at long ranges, and, SMGs can put out more bullets per second than your pistol can. But what I found was it almost didn't matter whether I had a submachine gun, a pistol, or a rifle. I was still kind of running circles around people and shooting them in the head.
Yep.
And I found that each weapon was functionally very, very similar to every other weapon. So, although theoretically this game has a bunch of different guns, I think that in practice they all pretty much play the same.
They're all the same? Yeah, completely agree. There's no strategic difference between any of them because I'm just, even if I had like a fully automatic weapon, I was still like tap firing at heads, basically. Like with every single gun. Even the sniper rifle is semi-automatic, so you can just tap fire it as fast as a handgun. And it doesn't lose accuracy. Is there like any recoil in this game at all? Like I feel like everything is perfectly accurate almost.
There's not recoil, but there is bullet spread. So a lot of the weapons, even like the AK, the SMGs, etc., the longer you hold down the trigger, the more the weapon spreads out. So it is better to do taps of burst fire.
Yeah, I just tapped really quickly with every single weapon, basically, and that was super effective, I found. Which, like you said, makes everything feel super samey, and is especially a problem when stuff like the shotgun or the rocket launcher only appear like in one level each, and they're clearly the guns that are most different from one another.
Yeah, the shotgun's good. I like the shotgun on that statue level. I found all of the explosive weapons basically useless. Yeah, like it's not that they don't do anything, it's that strafing towards your enemy and shooting them in the head is always going to be more effective than trying to use these explosive weapons that you can very easily kill yourself with.
Yes.
Because the way the explosions work is the explosions like exist over a span of 3 seconds. So if you create an explosion by shooting at someone and then try to move through it, you die.
That reminds me when we did Quake and I quickly gave up using the grenade launcher because I killed myself many times.
The grenade launcher in Quake, as I said, is one of the greatest weapons ever made. These don't even begin to approach the grenade launcher.
As far as I can tell, that grenade launcher is the reason to play that game, and me playing with the other weapons made it a shit experience, basically.
I was so disappointed in that. I literally wrote an article about the grenade launcher in Quake. That's how high I am on that gun.
And I was like, I'm not using it.
I was like, no. Honestly, Quake without the grenade launcher would be a way worse game. Like, that's how good it is.
Yeah, that's the game I reviewed.
Anyway, in this game, you just use whatever gun you happen to have ammo for, which will be whatever gun the enemies have, because you'll pick it up and you'll have ammo for it, and it doesn't matter. It's like if every Doom mission was chain gun. The chain gun's all you've got, a chain gun that you can aim with. That's what playing the game is like.
Yeah, it is like that. Yeah, and man, enemy grenades killed me a lot because I never saw them. I never saw them throw them, and they just kill you. Also, the explosive barrels in this game aren't red, and I died to that like 3 times.
You know the tank level? The tank level has the second tank level, the when you're chasing after them. There are a lot of enemies on those streets with grenade launchers and rocket launchers.
Yep.
That was probably the only.
Wait, there's a second tank level?
Well, the first tank level is the one where you escape on the airfield. Yeah, the other one is when you're going through the streets.
Oh, I just ran through that whole level.
I did the same thing.
I didn't even know there was a tank there.
Man, are you blind? Anyway, yes. I tried the tank. I tried the tank at first, and it was not working. But I died several times to people with explosives.
I loved that level because all the streets were super wide, and I got to boost around. That was the one level where I got to actually dodge enemy fire because the rocket dudes were fun to dodge. That was like the only one in the whole game, so I loved that level.
That is true. Like, it was tough, but it was fair.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I also wanted to make a point, and another point towards the moment-to-moment gameplay feeling good. I actually think they did a good job of having the enemies react to getting hit. It's almost to the game's detriment in some ways, because when you shoot a guy, it's like they're stunned for 3 seconds from one bullet. So you kind of if there's lots of enemies, you can just sweep across the room to stun them all and then pick them off one by one as they're bent over in agony. But it did make, the act of hitting people feel good because they so visibly reacted to getting shot.
Yeah, my problem often was that the dying body would be blocking bullets from the other ones.
Yeah.
Like the corpse, the slowly falling corpse was acting as cover. Um, yeah, overall with this moment to moment gameplay, like I think it is fun. Like I said, makes my monkey brain happy. However, I do also think it's very repetitive.
Yeah.
Like from a first playthrough point of view, not a speedrunning perspective. And I think that the problem is there's just not much depth here. Like when you play Doom or Quake or anything, those games that with deeper, more engaging gameplay with different weapon types and enemy types, whether they're melee or ranged, dodging projectiles, all of those things adds a level of depth to the FPS gameplay that I think makes it easier to play for long periods of time.
Yep.
The problem with this game from a moment to moment perspective is that once you've gone down one corridor filled with enemies, or once you've done it a few times, you've kind of seen what the game has to offer. And it doesn't really matter if the building is themed as a prison or a secret base or whatever. The essential gameplay is still the same. So while it was enjoyable in the first couple of hours, then it was no longer enjoyable because I'd seen everything that the game had to offer.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you here, and I actually think that I would enjoy this game as a whole more if I had played one level a week for like a year, rather than tried to play a bunch of it in one go for the sake of reviewing it, in 2 weeks. So I think that there is fun to be had here. I don't think this is a game you could get fully invested in. Like, I couldn't, Doom is a game with enough depth that it has still today a huge modding scene for custom levels. That I don't think, I'd really care to dive into GoldenEye mods all that much.
It has a real. So I think you're right, but I think that you can go extreme because the speedrunning scene for GoldenEye is actually sick. Like well. I think the thing that makes this a fun game as a speedrunning game is like the speed of your movement and the optimizations you can do with it. A lot of the speedrunners use, when you get shot, you kind of get knocked back.
Oh, they use that.
Yeah, so they'll be running and using damage boosts to actually go even faster. Cool. There's a lot of clever things you can do with like throwing grenades to, blow a thing up on the opposite side of the map to complete an objective early. And the levels are all short enough, like they'll take a minute or two to blast through that optimizing that routing is really interesting. But in between those extremes, playing once a week and kind of like, enjoying the 5 minutes of fun, or speed running it and doing the levels hundreds and hundreds of times over and optimizing, which is where James and I fall, I think it ends up being too repetitive.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Like, I think I'd like to play another game that had really short, puzzly FPS levels that were about, figuring out what to do and then doing them, I guess. Like,
you might like Devil's Daggers. Have you heard of that game?
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's like a survival FPS where the runs last 5 minutes on average.
Okay,
maybe 10 minutes.
Maybe I would like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the whole game, and you have to be strategic in what enemies you take out, and it gets harder and harder with every passing second. So
yep. Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Yeah, that sounds good. For GoldenEye, I guess overall, like, the moment-to-moment gameplay is fun, and I think this could have been a really forever great game if the enemy variety and weapon variety was up to scratch. That's really, even without the objectives being good, if it had those things, like, and I could turn off the objectives and have a great time. But it is quite shallow, dumb fun, and that's really all there is here, to be honest, for most people, I think. Visually, I think this game has aged pretty poorly. There's like a couple of scenes in the game which still look okay. I think on top of the dam in the first level looks fine, and in the caves it looks okay. But the problem is that GoldenEye's, like, as a movie, has the characters go through lots of, like, secret evil people's bases, basically, which, rooms inhabited by people necessitate a lot of ground clutter. So many of the rooms in this game are just like a grey room with one table in it. That it's just stupid looking. The hardware 2 limitations do not sell any of these areas, so
it's ugly as sin. I mean, and we were playing at our full computer's screen resolution. I don't know if it went up to your ultra widescreen, James, but I was playing at 1920 by 1080. There's just no saving an N64 game aping realism. With the attention to detail on that snow level, a lot of those buildings are just empty buildings. Yeah. It's just it's an enemy spawn point, infinite enemy respawn point. The one detail I liked, so that's a very small thing, but I was like, that's kind of cool, is when you're in the prison cell with Natalia right next to you, there are bullet holes on the wall behind you. And I was like, all right, that's a neat little detail. But mostly, it's just an ugly looking game, and you can blow it up as much as you like. It'll still be ugly. Worse than Max Payne, that's for sure.
Absolutely worse than Max Payne. That game's visuals are bad, but they're bad in a way that elevates it. This game is not.
And significantly worse than Call of Duty 1.
I'd agree with that. Yeah, and I hated the way that game looked. I think this is worse.
Whereas I really liked it. So.
Yeah. I've hit all my notes, Patrick.
Okay, well, me too, mostly. I think we've said most of what we need to say. It is a relatively simple game. Should we have your music break and then we'll move on to final impressions?
Yeah, why not? So I picked the music that played in the very first level of the game because I'm boring and I actually quite liked it. So this is the music that plays in the dam. Alrighty, it's time for the final verdict. Patrick, take us away.
I cannot recommend GoldenEye 007. I do think that there is something here. It's not that this was a horrible experience from start to finish. I quite enjoyed a lot of the time the moment-to-moment gameplay of running around strafing shooting guys. It's enjoyable on some level. But I think that it fails in terms of being a cinematic shooter, in terms of having an engaging and engrossing storyline. I think it fails as an objective-based gameplay shooter, not because the structure is inherently flawed, but because in execution it's also vague and miserable. The UI is a mess. I think that things like the turrets are just poorly designed, shooting you at the edge of your field of view. They're often at the edge of the fog. And I think that the game just becomes too repetitive too quickly. There's not enough substance or depth here to make this a game that you really want to continue playing or replay, unless you go down the speedrunning route and go very, very obsessive about it. It's certainly not the worst game we've ever played, but it's not worth your time to play today. It's not worth taking a break from either linear shooters or more open-ended shooters. It occupies a historical place for console shooters. But it's outside of that, I wouldn't say it's worth downloading and giving a try, even with the fantastic emulation software. This one is for a nostalgia trip only.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with this. Now, it's not that I found GoldenEye unpleasant to play. In fact, most of the time I was playing this game, I would say I was enjoying myself, specifically when I was just, zooming around and aiming for headshots. There is a lot of dumb fun to be had here. That said, you have so many other games that you could be playing instead of this game that just, kind of enjoyable for me doesn't pass the bar of being a game I would recommend people go out of their way to play. Can you play this game and have a good time? Absolutely. I think that GoldenEye is still a game that can be fun to play, assuming that you are playing purely to zoom around and, hip fire people in the head, but it is not such a fun experience that you should go out of your way to play it. So for me, this game gets like the absolute barest of passes. Unless you're really interested in, probably don't go. But if you are, for whatever reason, really want to play this game, I would not tell you not to play it. There is fun to be had here. It's just not the best use of your time, to be perfectly honest. So GoldenEye, it was fine. It definitely doesn't live up to its reputation. I think a lot of people love this game out of nostalgia, and I can understand that. If somebody told me they loved this game to bits, I'd get it. It's just not, one that I'd expect people these days to love unless they'd played it previously.
Yeah, I think the thing that really stands out for me is that compared to the PC FPS games that were being released at the same time, Quake, Blood, Duke Nukem 3D, this is pathetic. In terms of, those games are excellent and still enjoyable to play to this day. They're not flawless by any means, but they are excellent FPS games to this day. This is not even close, and I think that it wasn't until maybe Medal of Honor Allied Assault, maybe even Call of Duty 1, that this kind of genre of hit scan, semi-realistic shooters really kind of got to a space where you can start calling them good games.
It's interesting because I feel like those older games could have ran on the N64 with alterations. Doom 64
there's a version of Quake,
exists, right?
I swear, on one of Doom 64 I guess is its own unique thing. So I mean Doom definitely could have run on them. But yeah, Doom is a much better game than this game.
Absolutely, yeah. Although I would, I actually think I enjoyed playing this game more than I enjoyed playing Doom 2. Funnily enough.
Doom 2 is a mess. I mean, as we said with Doom 2, Doom 2 is I don't know, 30% great levels, 30% awful levels, and a bunch of mediocre ones. So I can see playing this being more enjoyable than fucking Barrels of Fun, or those ones where you're on those tiny stupid platforms, just awful design choices. GoldenEye never gets that bad in its design.
Yeah, Doom 2 definitely has way higher highs than this game, though, for sure.
Man, it makes me want to do Plutonia Experiment. I wonder if you're ready for that, James. That shit is hard.
Maybe one day. Yeah.
Alrighty, that about sums it up. Thank you so much for listening to us give our verdict on GoldenEye 007. We are Retrospectives. Each and every fortnight, we review these classic games to tell you if they're worth your time to play today. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. It's got all of our episodes, a bunch of articles that James and I have written, and links to all of our social media, the most important of which is our Discord server. That's where most of our discussion and community involvement happens, where we get into arguments about old games and new, and we would love if you would join up. We'll put a link in the show notes so that you can join up and tell us what you thought of GoldenEye 007. So, James, I picked GoldenEye this time, so what are we doing next fortnight? And I'm just hoping it's a short game because Elden Ring is finally releasing.
Well, I actually wanted to play a 15-hour game, so that's not super long, but it's probably a bit longer than you were hoping.
I just got to get cracking. I've got 5 days to get it finished.
Well, okay, so we haven't done a community request in a while, and this one was asked a few times by user Vexus. And I've been meaning to get to this one ever since we did Resident Evil because we both loved that game. So this is another like horror game on the GameCube. We're going to be playing Eternal Darkness, and I've heard some really good things about this game. I've heard some weird things about this game, and based on everything that I've read, with a lot of the, I don't know how much Patrick knows, but there's some weird shit that happens near the end. I am actually looking forward to it. If it's anywhere near as fun as our last horror on the GameCube game, you know, I'll love it, right?
I know literally nothing about this game, so I'll be going in completely blind. I know the title and that's it. Although, I mean, Resident Evil Remake, that's going to be a very high bar to clear, because in a lot of ways, that's one of the best games we've done on this podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to seeing if it can stand up, but I'm skeptical it will clear Resident Evil. But there's a lot of room for it to be a good game and you know, be worse than Resident Evil.
Yeah, this game has stuff like sanity meters and that kind of thing, maybe something similar to like Amnesia. So we're going to be seeing something like that in a really early form. You know, looking forward to it. And it'd be good to you know, get through this request backlog that we've you know, got piling up and we've been a bit slack on. So
is there a mouse and keyboard hack for it?
Probably not. No.
All right, I'll cope. I'll cope with my controller.
He'll deal with it. So yeah, thanks for everyone for listening, and we'll see you next fortnight for Eternal Darkness: Sanity's Requiem.
We'll see you then.